And then there was some dogs barking in the background, and I could see through my MBGs that this sentry had been alerted. So I sort of came on the net. I said, stand to. And then as I look up, there's all these like red dots. There's all these like IR dots on this guy. And I sort of look behind me, and everyone's sort of like leaning out. Everyone's almost like ready. I was like, okay, I'm in good company here.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Dean Stott, a former operator with the UK Special Boat Service who saw combat with both the SBS and the Commandos. Dean would eventually injure his leg in a HAHO jump, high altitude, high opening accident, getting ready for another deployment that would end his military career, but would not end his thrill-seeking sense of adventure. In fact, only 2 days after leaving the military, Dean was providing security for people in remote and dangerous parts of the world, eventually standing up his own security company. Dean, like many former operators, tried a more predictable existence in an office, but quickly found himself searching for the adrenaline highs he left behind. As a result, he found his way to biking and set 2 world records. Dean's book, Relentless, will be available on November 28th in the US, and it details some of the topics we discuss in this interview and more, including his close friendship to Prince Harry, who listeners will know I appreciate given his background flying Apaches. Dean's got more adventures ahead, including another record-breaking opportunity in Africa, and I hope you enjoy this discussion of what can only be called a full life lived to the edge as much as I did, and if you're like me, you're also going to be just a little bit jealous. Dean, thanks for taking the time to share your story with us today.
No, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on.
So I wanted to talk just a little bit first, because I think people might refer to you as a bit of an adventurist, thrill seeker, and you've been to many dangerous places and continue to do so. Can we talk about the Pan American bike ride, when that came in your career, what that was all about? Because it sounds like something that was pretty dangerous, but also I'm very envious that you got to do this.
Yeah, the Pan American Highway, that sort of came in late in my career. 2018, I set off on the Pan American Highway. But my reasonings for doing that was I'd spent a lot of time, as we'll touch on, in the military and then in the private security sector. And it came to a point in my life where I was taking too many risks. I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. I'd just come home from evacuating the Canadian embassy from Libya. And so my wife was like, that enough's enough. As we touched on my book later, chapter 16 was called Dead or Divorced. And that was the sort of T-junction we were in my life. And my wife was a property developer. And so I took a sabbatical from the security industry and ended up working with my wife in property developing. And we'll touch on my backstory later. But with my backstory, you can imagine how bored I was sat in these architects and planners meetings, looking at all these drawings of buildings and the infrastructure and the plumbing and the heating systems. And I wasn't interested at all. So my wife could see that glaze in my eyes. It was just literally, there was nothing there. And she said, right, you need to do something. So I would just at the time, I got injured out of the military, medical withdrawal, and my injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg. So I'd spent so much time in the security industry just focusing on work that I sort of neglected my own physical and mental well-being. And so I just bought a road bike off Amazon, just cycled to and from the office, but straight away being physically active again, I felt like there was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I go in the gym and do pull-ups and press-ups, but when you're getting the lungs going, that cardiovascular, it's a totally different feeling. And so as a young boy, I always grew up at Christmas. I would always get this annual called Guinness Book of Records. So I'd always been fascinated with these world records, these endurance achievements, or how many Ferrero Rochers you could eat in about 10 minutes, Or, all them one. I should have probably done something like that. And so I said to my wife, well, it was a month before my 40th birthday. So I said, well, I fancy doing a world record. And she said, what in? I said, well, cycling seems to be good, and doesn't seem to be hampering my injury. So my wife then found the world's longest road, the Pan American Highway, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. So I sort of joke when I say that she wanted me out the house at this point. But for me, it was like, well, there's a lot of countries there that I've not been to before. And for me, I like to have a challenge. So yeah, that's what I did. Having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for the world record to cycle the world's longest road. And 6 weeks later, Guinness came back and said, you've been successful on your application. So that was the birth of the bike ride. But for me, I like to always give back where possible, especially in the philanthropy world, do a lot with the military veteran community. And so I needed a campaign, something that gives you that extra drive and motivation when things get hard. And so I rang a close friend of mine who I'd known 15 years now. Prince Harry was his name, who's probably one of the biggest philanthropists out there. And so I told him about my challenge, and he was about to launch a mental health campaign and really talk about end the taboo around mental health. And I'd seen firsthand in the military issues in mental health, but not throughout the whole of society, postnatal depression, young children, teenagers. And so that's where we came. That was the campaign message. So we now had the challenge, and we now had the campaign message. And my aim was to raise £1 million before I then trained for a year, learned a lot in the training element of it. I wasn't a cyclist. I still, although I have 2 world records and became the first man in history to do it under 100 days, I still class myself as a novice cyclist. But going into this, I knew a lot about planning and preparation from my time in the military and the private security sector. And so I just took a military set of orders, put it on this plan, and just crossed out ammunition. And then just really evolved as a project.
That's great. So if I got this correct, your wife chose the route for you?
My wife chose the route. Yeah, I was actually looking. Originally, when I was looking at some of the challenges, I was looking at Cairo to Cape Town, the length of Africa. But my private security career, majority of my time was in Africa anyway. So it's a continent that I love, and I do still love Africa. But I wanted to go or see places I hadn't seen before. So she found the world's longest road. I thought, perfect. That's the one for me. But unlike Africa, it's pretty much going to be dry and arid from the start to the finish. What the Pan America Highway offers is everything, all 4 seasons. When I was in Chile, the Atacama Desert is the driest non-popular desert in the world. It was 47 degrees centigrade for a week with no shade. And then you have Alaska, it was -20 in the snow. So it literally, you are cycling in all those different types of terrains and environments. And that was what was more attractive to me as well, and the different cultures and sites that we would see along the way.
That's so cool. Okay. Can we speak just briefly about Prince Harry and your connection?
Yes.
Obviously, people who listen to this show know that I love this guy because he was a gun pilot. He flew Apaches, but
Yes.
You knew him before he became even that cool. So can you just share your mutual background?
Yeah, so him and I met each other in summer 2007. I was going on a JTAC course prior to going back out to Afghanistan, and he was a young second lieutenant with the Blues and Royals, and I think his unit were also going to be out in Afghanistan as well. And obviously, being a young officer, he wanted to be out there with the men, doing what they do day in, day out, and what he signed up to do. But I think obviously, because of who he is, it brings a lot of attention. And so he needed to have a role or a title, to be out there or have more of a purpose. So his commanding officer, took the risk and said, look, well, we need a regimental JTAC. So sent him on the JTAC course. But you can imagine, on the JTAC course, where it is in North Yorkshire, RAF Leman, an RAF base, and you've got these army, recruits. Or army students, and this little wooden hut at the end of the runway. No one really pays much attention. But on this first day that we turned up, I noticed there was a lot of stripes and arms. There was a lot of people that, of high rank that I wouldn't expect to see on a JTAC course. And it was because obviously he was there as well. So they sort of all came in and, had a bit of FaceTime. He asked asked to leave the room, and then we were sort of told, look, you know who's on course, treat him like one of your own. He gets no preferential treatment. And I thought, yeah, fine, that makes sense. So then he comes back in the room, and then the first lecture is on call signs. And, you know, he puts his hand up and said, you know, if successful on this course, do I get a call sign? And I sort of blurted out an explicit, which related to the color of his hair, much to the disgust of everyone in the room. And like, you could see the open eyes and open mouths. And I was like, what? You just told us to treat him like one of their own. And yeah, I think that was the decision then from the Sergeant Major, that you two will be partnered off. And so, yeah, we spent 6 weeks together. And, you know, I do a lot of interviews and be asked a lot of questions about him. I think for me, you know, over the years that I've seen him, that was probably where he was probably at his most happiest, most comfortable, because he wasn't under the spotlight of the media. He could be Second Lieutenant Henry, or he could be Captain Henry, and, you know, fly Apaches. And so, you know, that's where he was most comfortable. You know, he has a great sense of humor, and there wasn't any preferential treatment. He was a good operator. Yeah. He was a good operator, and, you know, he could do the job and do the job well. So yeah, that's how we originally met. And then, yeah, 15 years on, still keeping in comms.
Yeah, you got to imagine, just with the spotlight on you every day, the ability to be around people who are just going to treat you like shit, like everyone else, is probably a good, like, you probably long for that when you're living that lifestyle.
And I think I was a good sounding board for him. I met him at the Army Navy Rugby one year, and this was not long after I got injured, and me and my wife and him were in the car park chatting, and he just finished his pilot's course. And, you know, he goes, look, I need to make a decision next week whether I fly Lynx or Apache. And when a Lynx pilot for us is almost like a glorified taxi driver. It's a general's taxi, you know what I mean? There's not much in it. Whereas the Apaches, you know, very much impressive. But the Apache call signs in Afghanistan when we were JTACs are called Ugly 1 and Ugly 2. Yeah. And so I said to him, well, look, I always tell the lads to go ugly early. And he messaged me later that week, and he'd gone ugly. So
I love it.
I was pleased to see that he sort of went with his heart rather than what he felt he was being steered more towards.
So basically, you're the reason that he ended up flying Apaches, is what you're saying.
I'd like to say that's one of the reasons. Yeah, I think he knew the answer. I think he probably just needed a couple of words of persuasion from others.
Oh, I'm so glad you did that. Yeah, and actually, our unit was Ugly Eddie, so that part of that is named at the ugly call sign comes from that. The 101st. Anyway, so you did this crazy bike ride. You've already talked about spending time in Africa, living overseas, working in different parts of the world. If we went back to Dean as a kid, would we be surprised that this was the trajectory your life took?
I think you would be surprised. You know, although I was born into a military family, my father was military, my grandparents were military. So what we would call we call them pads brats as kids. So the military accommodation is known as a pad. So you're known as a pads brat, which means you're a military child. So every 3 years we would move house. My dad would get posted somewhere. My parents split up when I was 8 years old, actually, and my mother took me and my sisters up to Manchester, and we ended up living in a homeless home in Moss Side, which at the time is like the roughest, you call them ghettos, roughest ghetto in the UK. But my father, he put his career on pause, actually. He was offered a post into Germany as a regimental sergeant major, put it on pause, and made sure he went to see us every other weekend. And we had we went to court, and my father got custody of me and my sisters. So we then moved back down to Aldershot. And Aldershot is almost like, it's like Fort Bragg, Camp Pendleton, all pushed into one. It's the home of the British Army. And so, yeah, although I was immersed in that environment, it was never forced upon me to, you know, join the military myself. My father then retired, and we sort of left that environment and moved out into the country in a nice little village in Surrey. And so I then went, my last years of schooling, I ended up going to school with kids who knew nothing about the military. I actually always wanted to be a fireman. You know, that was always my sort of ambition growing up. And, you know, I wasn't as big as I am now. I was probably one of the smaller guys, but still had a good sense of humor. But with school, I think my father, he was the army. You call it we call it soccer. You guys call it soccer.
Yeah.
We call it football. He was the army football manager, player, and coach. So I sort of had that competitive drive anyway from my father. I wasn't that big. Everything was a competition. Even playing board games at home, it was all a competition. You had to win. And at school, again, I wasn't the biggest person, but I loved doing physical activity. So, if someone had dropped out of the basketball team, I'd jump in out. If someone dropped out of the hockey team, I'd do that. I'd play rugby, I'd play football. So although I wasn't the best, I ended up getting sports personality of the year at school. And again, it's not because you're the best, it's because you're willing to take part. And I think that's later on in my life in the military, I knew I was a good team player and gave everything my all. So, but yeah, to say that you would then go on and be the military yourself, I would not have, looking back at the Dean Stott of 15, 16, I would have said no. Actually, the reason I joined the military was I went to college after school and I went on a surfing holiday with my friends down to Newquay, down in Cornwall. And my dad had been taking us surfing every summer holiday since we were young kids. So I really had a fondness for the water. And 2 weeks later, he came to pick me and my friends up. And I wasn't there. I'd found a job in Newquay. I was silver service waitering. So I found a job that I could surf. I could serve breakfast in the morning. I'd get breakfast myself, surf all day, and then do the same in the evening. And my father then came looking for me long before mobile phones. This is 1994. And, he found me working in a surf shop. And he's like, what are you going to do with your life? You've ruined your education. And I was still only a young lad. And so to silence him, I said, well, I'll join the military. I was expecting some warm, comforting words and advice. Instead, I was told I would last 2 minutes. And so it was quite a silent road trip back home, about 4 hours. But the next morning, I walked into the careers office, went into the careers office. And the careers office is actually probably only 400 meters from my dad's, where he was working now. And I think he could then sort of see that I was being serious. And I then went on to they have like a 3-day familiarization. You're not actually in basic training, but you go to a training establishment, you do PT tests and speak to other recruits about their career choices. And I came back from that 3 days and I got marked grade A. And so my father, I think he now realized actually I was being serious in my decision. And his initial comment of your last 2 minutes was really to explain more about the military to me, because of we would call him a tracksuit soldier, because he was very good at sport. So the majority of his career, he's in a tracksuit and he's playing sport. But I wasn't aware about the military as a whole, who did what, where everyone was positioned, what their roles were within the military. And Aldershot was the home of the parachute regiment, so it was all airborne. So I'd never heard of the Commandos or the Special Boat Service. So yeah, he really sort of explained that to me. He said, well, look, you can join the Royal Engineers. He was thinking short term. That would probably do 3 years. So get as much as you could from your time in there, get a trade, get something that you can walk away from the military with and use as a second career. But he explained about the Commandos. And if you go Commandos, you can also get your parachute wings if you go reconnaissance. So yeah, he sort of gave me a real insight. But yeah, although his first comment was quite damning, from then on, he did sort of give me that gentle nudge and advice route.
Just a quick word from one of our sponsors, and we'll get right back to this combat story. It can be hard to find the right gift for family, friends, and kids. If you want to avoid boring, basic, and bland gifts this year, Uncommon Goods is your secret weapon. Whether you're shopping for your Secret Santa or your entire family, Uncommon Goods knows exactly what they want. I asked my kids to look for some interesting gifts, and they found a ton, including a bubble tea kit to make your own bubble tea, make your own guitar pick, Millennials versus Boomers trivia game, do-it-yourself watchmaker kit, build your own marble run stack set, do-it-yourself cardboard pinball machine, and more. Basically, there are plenty of unique options out there for everyone. One of the great things about shopping at Uncommon Goods is that you're supporting artists and small independent businesses, like Combat Story. These fine products are often made in small batches, so shop now before they sell out for this holiday season. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/combat. That's uncommongoods.com/combat for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. And now, back to this combat story. If you hadn't intervened when you were working like in that kind of waiter surf lifestyle, do you think you would have found your way there anyway to the military?
I'm not too sure. You can never, I don't know. I think there's always a pull. I think if you don't, there's something that steers you in that direction. So I may have joined the Navy. You never know. I'm not sure. But no, I'm sort of glad. People say, looking back as a child, would you change anything? I wouldn't have changed anything. Every choice that I made, whether it was good or bad, has brought me to where I am today. And I'm just glad that he did actually come down and come try and find me, because other fathers may have just said, well, look, I'll let him, find his own way. But I think it was obviously, like I said, long before mobile phones. I think it was also more of being a father figure to just make sure I am okay.
Yeah. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Dean, you go into the Commandos, then you find your way to SBS. Why take that route? Was SBS or SAS the kind of goal initially, or was it just let me get my foot in the door?
Yeah, not at all. No, when I joined, I was weighing, we work in kilograms. I was weighing about 67 kilos, and I'm 90 kilos now. And so really, I just went to basic training, did the basic training, got through, and then had to go to phase 2 training. I mean, as you're going through training, you're seeing people with maroon berets and green berets, and one of my instructors on my basic training was a commando. So for me, it was like, well, maybe I do that. But as I'm doing all these courses, the earlier courses, I'm getting, when you pass, you obviously, there's an element of pride, and you feel that, and then you sort of look back and say that actually wasn't that bad. And I soon realized that I was very competitive with my peers, but also quite a lot fitter than I thought I was originally. So as I'm doing these different courses, I'm physically getting stronger, but mentally I'm getting stronger. So then, yes, I went and did the commando course at a young age, and then got selected for reconnaissance troop. And so it's like, so for me, in a short period of time, I'd done a number of courses, the diving courses, the physical training instructor courses, and really the only sort of option left for me was Tier 1 UK Special Forces. I did 8 years in Free Commander Brigade in the reconnaissance forces, so worked alongside all the Royal Marines. I was also an instructor on the commando course alongside the Royal Marines. And when I went on selection, I was the senior dive instructor at the Defence Diving School. So there was always this pull towards the water, my love for the water from the surface. So in the UK, you have the Special Air Service and the Special Boat Service. They're actually, the selection process is combined, whereas in the US, like Delta Force will have their own selection process, and then SEAL Team 6 will have their own one. Ours is actually joint. So the SBS primarily was 100% Royal Marines. You could only be a Royal Marine to go SBS, but you could join the SAS from the Royal Marines, and they were losing a lot of potential candidates because a lot of guys don't like diving. A lot of guys, or guys may have had head injuries and couldn't dive. So it was just really convenient timing. They then decided to open their doors up tri-service to the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, just as I was looking at going on selection. So yeah, much to the disgust of my friends in the SAS, I put my application form in for the Special Boat Service. And, they tell you when you're on selection, they tell you to be the grey man as often as possible. Be the grey man. I was the grey man for about 2 minutes on the 6-month course, because it was like, it was almost put a neon light on my head, that I was the Army guy going to the Special Boat Service. And I was sort of told, why are you going there? I said, I like diving. I was like, it's not a good enough excuse. But 6 months later, 8 of us passed, 200 start and 8 pass, and I ended up becoming one of the first candidates to go through. And I think now, chatting to some of the guys, I think about 15% of the Special Boat Service now come from other units, not the Royal Marines. So sort of open those floodgates. But I joined at a time, probably the busiest time in UK SF history, and the SBS were in Afghanistan and the SAS were in Iraq. So we were, That also probably helped the recruitment drive for the SBS as well, because as Iraq was starting to taper down, Afghan was still at full throttle.
The 8 that made it through that course, was that like 8 people that would go to either SAS or SBS, or is that like out of 200, 8 went to SBS, or is that pulling?
Yeah, I think it was eight to the SBS, 8 to the SBS, and probably about eight to the SAS as well. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So you mentioned much to the disgust of your friends who are in SAS. What are the stereotypes that you hold for the SAS and what do they hold for SBS in return?
I think the joy or the luxury of having the joint selection is the fact that they haven't done anything that you haven't done, and so you automatically get that mutual respect because you've been through the same process of them. Actually, years of old, SBS did have their own selection process and SAS had theirs, and there was a lot of friction. People don't realize, but sort of where the animosity stemmed back from is during the Falklands War. Is the SAS, the only SBS fatality came from an SAS blue on blue, because the Army Special Forces didn't know where the Navy Special Forces was. So post Falklands War, they set up Director Special Forces. So he would be able to know exactly where all the chess pieces were on the board. And that's when they sort of came together. They formed UK Special Forces. The selection was the same. And so now, yes, those of old, the old and bold, they've all retired now. So that sort of friction and animosity is gone. There's actually 97% commonality between the groups. And because we don't have large numbers like potentially here in the US, you're talking, a few hundred, couple of hundred, is that we actually have to come together on a few of the operations as well. So, I get asked the question, SES, SBS, what's the difference? And, again, 97% commonality. I'd say, I joke when I say SAS surprising the average soldier, SBS slightly better soldier. That's how I sort of do it. But actually, no, both units very, the selection process is so difficult that there is that mutual respect always.
No, I would figure that it's real tight, especially because of the shared suffering, I guess, from that course, which is the same course that's used for Delta and a lot of the US units.
And there's a lot of guys that there's guys that when I on some of my courses before me and after me, there's guys that you can choose as well. You can before you go on selection, you have to choose which one you'll go in, SBS or SES. But if you then decide, right, after a year, actually I want to go to the other, that you can actually swap. So there are occasions where guys do swap. So, and you tend to still see them, and that normally tends to be geographically where their home is. It might be better actually. A friend of mine, he was in the SBS, but his family lived in Birmingham, which is not far from Hereford. So when he was having nights back in Poole down on the south coast, he could be home. And so really it wasn't because of anything like that. It was just geographically, it was better positioned for him, and he'd be able to see his family more often. So yeah, there are occasions where people cross over.
And even as you talk about mission sets, Iraq to Afghanistan, since it's separate units in both of those, I assume you're executing the same mission set. I mean, interchangeable for the most part.
Yeah, no, we're executing the same mission set. Actually, it got to a stage, and I think because we were in Afghanistan so long, we were more operationally capable doing the air and mobility because of the landscape that we're operating in. Sure. And the SES were more operationally capable on some of the maritime stuff. And it was like, so actually post now, they've gone back to their way of the insurgent skills. The only difference between the two units, if there's a counter-terrorism hostage rescue situation, is that both units will come together, because you need the manpower. But whether if it's a maritime operation, the command and control will come from the SBS. And if it was an aircraft or hotel or land, then it would come from the SAS. And that really is the only difference. But there's a lot of cross-training,
Super interesting. Yeah. So, Dean, could you take us to the first time you find yourself outside the wire? I don't know when this is. I don't care if it's the most mundane operation. It's always interesting to hear what your first experiences like. So if you could share kind of like what unit you were in, I don't know if it was
Yeah.
with the Commandos or you were with
Yeah.
SBS, and where you were at and what it was like for you.
Yeah, so I was in Brigade Reconnaissance Force for Brigade Reconnaissance Force for Commando Forces, and so what that comprises of is the Royal Marines, the snipers and the mountain leaders, 148 battery Royal Artillery, forward operating observers, and 59 Commando Reconnaissance, which was the Royal Engineer Commandos, which was us. And it was in the winter of 90. Let me get it right. No, winter of 99, and it was the Kosovo. And so for us, this was the first operational tour for Recce Troop since the Falklands Wars, so
Wow.
17 years before. There'd been tours to Northern Ireland and stuff like that. So, you know, a lot of eyes were on us as a small unit. And we only had probably at max 3 6-man teams, and 2 of them were on this tour. So, you know, for a young guy, it was great. I was started off as the radio operator and ended up finishing the tour as second in command. But our very first operation, you know, you're always keen, you know, this is the first one in 17 years. We want to get it all right. So we go into this brief and this intelligence officer comes in, gives us sort of an overview of the ground that we're going on, the target that we need to do. And this wasn't a combat zone. This was more peacekeeping and observing. So there was a 5K buffer zone between Kosovo and Serbia, and basically told no troops should be in there. But that wasn't the case. There was obviously people in there, but we're also trying to find those guilty of war crimes as well. There was a lot of them because of the genocide. So we had a target pack which was in this area in the 5K buffer zone. So because the situation where it was and how far it was, we had to take everything in. We do hard routines, so we take our feces and our urine with us. We didn't know what water sources there would be because they were on the ground, and so we took some extra jerry cans as well. So actually, weight-wise, we took a lot of kit. And because it was one of the first tours, they were literally buying camera kits off the shelves. They weren't even as a military proof, you know, some of these like big lenses. So there was a lot of heavy kit. And my patrol commander at the time, a Scottish guy, he ended up being sick. So he's got food poisoning, and we're patrolling in. And so he's man down, and then my other mate steps in, and he sort of takes over. And then me and my friend are at the back, and we're obviously covering the 6. But I could hear this almost like footsteps, like crunching. So every time we sort of went to ground, did a listening stop, we could almost hear like these footsteps. It felt and sounded like someone was trying to creep up on us. So straight, you know, all the time I'd have to say to the patrol, you know, get down, listen, you know, observe for your sights. And we just couldn't see anything. This carried on, you know, made an assessment, but we'll just keep push forward. And we got to our OP position, set up the OP, and we were there for about just shy of 2 weeks. But this noise kept alerting us. It just felt like someone was like following us, but we just couldn't see anything. Even at night, you know, going through the scopes, and there's nothing there. So it was a successful operation. We got the images that we needed, and you know, my friend recovered from the food poisoning. You know, managed to get a couple of days rest and things like that. And then we pulled out, and we got airlifted back to the camp in Pristina. And then we have a debrief, and then you know, talked about the operation. You know, any other points? And I'm like, yeah. I said I can't guarantee it, but it felt like we were being followed. You know, we kept hearing this rustling. You know, we checked our arcs, you know, we just couldn't see anything. And then this young little intelligence officer who was on the initial one, he steps up and said, oh yeah, I did forget to mention wildlife. I was like, oh yeah. And he said, yeah, it's breeding season for the tortoises. So the tortoises are coming out, you know, and breeding. So basically we've been stood to pretty much for 2 weeks because of these randy tortoises. But, you know, I mean, it's like, so for me, it was like, you know, for us, we're just so worried. But so yeah, I always make a point whenever we have briefs and things, I always ask the question about wildlife, you know, what we're going to expect. But yeah, it was you know, afterwards and now in reflection, it's quite funny, but at the time you're just on alert. And we didn't get much sleep during that 2 weeks.
Jeez. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. How about similar question, but the first time post 9/11 that you find
Hmm.
yourself in contact, maybe? What was that one
Yes.
like? And were you still in the Commandos at the time?
No, no, no. I was in the SBS on that one. I like post 9/11 initial one. All my friends went to Afghan, and I was an instructor on the training team on the commando course. So I was gutted. But actually, my first tour with the SBS, and I was very fortunate. We did the first ever operational jump for the SBS, and my first time on the ground with them, yeah, I exited the aircraft and did the first ever operational jump to get in the theater. So yeah, I landed
That's
in
awesome.
style. If that says, yeah, came in style. But I think for me, it was like, we do all this training, the repetitive training, and so on the day of the race, it's very fluid. You know what you're doing. But for me, I remember on one of them, I was the lead scout, and we walked in, and we actually got in there quite early. So we're waiting for Spectre, and so we couldn't do anything before. But it's like,
sorry, just real quick, Dean. So for those who don't know, Spectre is AC-130 gunship up in the air.
Yeah.
Incredible asset to have overhead.
Oh yeah,
Very powerful.
Yeah. So they say you don't normally, operate without them, but we'd arrived early, and I could see the compound. I could see the guy. I could see one of the sentries. And then there's some dogs barking in the background, and I could see from my MVGs that this sentry had been alerted. I don't know what it was that alerted him. So I sort of came on the net. I said, stand to. And then as I look up, there's all these like red dots. There's all these like IR dots on this guy. And I sort of look behind me, and everyone's sort of like leaning out. Everyone's almost like ready. I was like, okay, I'm in good company here. But I remember when I first got engaged at, and I don't know why, I thought, how rude of them, to be shooting at us. And I don't know, and it was only in reflection, I was like, I don't know, it's because we were so trained, so rehearsed and things that, don't expect them to shoot. Like, why would they be shooting back? You know what I mean? But yeah, that was just something I giggled at myself. And there's other ones where I remember one where my friend, were getting engaged right at the beginning of the op and at night. And then he just disappeared. And I heard him screaming. So I just thought, I thought he'd been hit. So I looked down, and he'd fallen down this well. And so, and I was like, will you stop messing about? And it's just like that dark humor. Yeah. So it is. But I think for me, that was the pinnacle of my career, being in the special boat service, doing what you'd sort of train to do. I think I touched on it. I think it was the busiest time in special forces history. Gone with the day. There used to be a saying that the op of the year. This is the op of the year. That period it was the op of the night. I mean, it may have been one of two or three. It was so busy, but the experiences that everyone got and the lessons that were learned as well, can be carried on to others was immense.
What years? So was this like 03 or 4?
No, this was late. This is 6. I think this was
6.
Yeah.
And when you said you jumped in, did you jump in to execute that op you were talking about, or you jumped into theater, regrouped, and then went out?
No, it was to execute an op. It was execute one of the ops. Yeah. So that was it was a HAHO jump, high altitude, high opening. So we just got HAHO training. So for us, it was an insurgent skill asset that we had. So, because I think at the time, as you know, each time you go out to the theatre, your TTPs need to change because the enemy understand a lot of your TTPs and know what you're about to do next or what you're planning. So it's almost staying ahead of the game. So in Afghan they know us as Green Eyes because of the MVG. So the only sort of real movement at night on helos is special forces. So you would get squirters, as you know, someone running away from a compound. So you're missing some of the targets or the HVTs that we were going for because it was actually the sound of the props would give them that sort of head start. So the purpose of this was that we would jump in off target, and then we would walk and surround the cordon the area, and then we would call in the aircraft. And so then we're already in position. So
just speaking of HAHO versus Halo, is there a preference among operators that that, hey, if we got to do one, let's do this one. I'm sure it depends on the situation, illumination, kind of visibility, all kinds of things. But
I think
adrenaline-wise, is there a big difference?
Yeah, I think there is. I think they, speak to the air troop lads who do the HAHO all the time. For me, it's like, if you ask me, well, I ended my career because I had a parachuting accident, which was a HAHO. So, but at the time, what we did when we were in Afghan and other places doing those operational jumps, HAHO worked. It worked for us on there. So it's good that you have the two options, but it depends on the task itself. But I sort of joke that you speak to some of the HAHO lads, Halo lads, and they've got no lines, but they've got a massive weight underneath them. And it's not like going to jump in Elsinore and do some civilian free falling. It's very robust. So yeah, there's no such thing as a fun jump, I don't say. Not in the military anyway. But yeah, it depends who you speak to and what the actual mission is as well. And yeah.
Not comparing this to jumping, but just flying at night in an Apache. I felt the same way often, where there's not like it's fun. It's interesting. Yeah. But there's a lot of danger that's kind of like packed into this event, flying with one eye, depending, if you can't go up on MVGs, using thermals, the speed, terrain. It's not like what people would imagine of just going out on a civilian flight, to your point of like, you're not jumping some tandem jump somewhere. Like, you got gear, it's probably at night, not great terrain.
But we always train at night, because you have to train for worst case scenario, which is obviously, and the majority of our operations are done at night. But yeah, like you say, as soon as you take away one of those senses, it's quite difficult. Jumping at night and you're trying to see the rest of your stick. You're like, well, where are they? Because there's no horizon. It's just like, you just need to trust that you are on that right bearing. And it is a comfort when they come up over net, but then just being able to look around you and make sure, at least if you're jumping in the day, you know if someone's had a malfunction, or if there's an issue, because you can see the person off somewhere else and you can probably talk them back in. At night, it's like, you've just got to trust that everyone's out, everyone's parachute has opened, there's no malfunctions, and then we're all going in the right direction.
Do you have comms? Are you talking air to air while you're flying down?
Yeah, you can talk air to air. Yeah, so you try to minimize it, but you talk air to air.
That's cool. Is there any event from your time with SBS? But I want to get to how you got injured, and because it sounds like it really. I mean, you still went back out and did some really dangerous things. Yeah. But are there any ops that you look back on where you think, I'm lucky that I made it out of this, or this one we all knew was going to go sideways, or something that you, maybe when you're on this 99-day bike ride, you kind of reflected back on, like, if I can make it through that, I can make it through anything?
Yeah, I think majority of the ops, you always have that question. Is like, there are close calls, and there are ones that like, well, that could have easily gone wrong. There's a good phrase: you can't be experienced without experiences. So each time you went out, you always learned something new. I mean, as you can have the best plan in the world, but it doesn't survive first contact. So it's like, it's all well and good. And I think that was the majority of ours. If it went to plan, then brilliant. But even if majority of it doesn't go to plan, but there are occasions where, when we used to fly in on the lifters, it was the iPod Nano. Remember the iPods?
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I had two playlists. I had the insertion and the extraction playlist. The insertion was like your AC/DCs and Metallicas and things like that. And then the one out was like, Enya or Last of the Mohicans soundtrack and things like that. But it was only because I think when you're on the ground and you're doing it, it's almost second nature. It becomes fluid. You know what you're doing. You have an objective, a mission, and things like that. It's only, you don't really think about it too much until you're flying back out. And then sometimes you're like, yeah, no, that could have easily gone wrong, or we were lucky and things like that. But yeah, I think if you almost go into every operation, have to think like that, not be naive to think you're indestructible. Everyone has fear, and anyone who says they don't is lying. So it's just what you do with that fear. I turn that into positive energy. So yeah, there are a few occasions, I guess, where I sort of look back and think that might have been risky.
You mentioned a couple times that obviously the physical side you had, But I think earlier you alluded to maybe you hadn't paid the same attention to the mental aspects or psychological. Is there anything that you think back on your career now, like maybe I could have done something differently to be mentally at another level?
Yeah. I think for me it's the sorry, my son
It's all good.
is no, I think, I look back at my career. My career wasn't a 5-star career. There were blips in my career. I ended up going to the UK military prison. I assaulted 3 guys in a bar. Yeah, and got 56 days in Colchester prison. And so it's like, I sort of look back and think, but I wouldn't change any of it. I wouldn't change any of it. I just think, I learned a lot from my peers. I looked at, especially as an instructor, I looked at those that I respected instructors, those that I didn't. And I just was almost like a sponge in the military. I was just getting the good things from them, not using the bad things, and just sort of growing as an individual. Yeah, no, as a young boy, I was probably, a few of my friends listen to this. Yeah, I was a feisty boy. I was a scrapper. But that might have been from my time as a young boy in Moss Side in Manchester, having to fight and continue through school. But I think looking back, I wish I had more confidence earlier on. Because I actually went on selection quite late in my career. I was a sergeant. I think if I believed in myself a bit more earlier, then I would have had more time in the special forces. So,
yeah. So, can you talk us through the injury? From what I've read, sounds like it ended the military side of your career, but not this adventure, travel, danger side.
Yeah. So we were going back out to Afghanistan again, doing pre-deployment training on a HAHO jump. And the young lads that had just passed selection, they needed to get HAHO qualified. So that was the reason we were out jumping. And Sergeant Major was like, look, well, you guys go do some fun jumps, although we were already qualified. And so we're out jumping with these lads as well. And normally I like to go number 1 on the stick, and then I do what I think it's called a frog, where you face back towards the inside the aircraft. It's almost like our signature thing as SBS operators. And so my team leader was like, right, Stott, you get in the middle now, not stop doing frogs at the front. I think it was upsetting the RAF jump instructors. And so I was in the middle of this stick, and then I jumped out. And normally, you count, do you count, and then you sort of look forward, make sure you've got a canopy, and then, start heading in the direction you're going. But as I sort of did my count, I then look up and see my foot is caught in the line above my head. And I said, well, that's new. That's never happened before. But my concern was I needed to clear that, because as soon as the parachute opens, it's now going to pull those lines back over my head and open the parachute. And so I was frantically trying to kick my leg out, and I couldn't clear it in time. And so that's what happened. The parachute opened, pulling my leg back over my head and to the right. Thankfully, my foot did clear from the lines and wasn't taken completely off. But on HAHO, you exit the aircraft at 15,000 feet. So it's the maximum limit you can go on before you have to go on to O2. So the air is very thin. I mean, as you're coming down, it gets better. And so straight away, I knew there was a problem. The pain, I'd never experienced anything like it. The pain was, and I wouldn't want to go through that again, but because of the pain, I was vomiting. It was that painful. But because of the thin air, I was also drifting in and out of consciousness as well. But as you touched on earlier about communications, we do have communications between the jumpers. But there was actually no point in me coming up on the radio telling them I've got a bad leg, because there was nothing they could do anyway until we got to the DZ. So I did what I could to follow the stick. And in my head, I was like, there was 2 things in my head. A was, how am I going to land this? Because I've only got 1 good leg. And if I have a bad landing, it could damage that one as well. I mean, the second one was the tour in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully it's not that bad and I can go on tour. But I looked at the approach of the other parachutists, gauged their approach, and I came in. And it was perfect landing, nice landing on 1 leg. It was great. But unfortunately, the damage sustained. I had an MRI scan the next day, and I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus within my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadriceps, so all the supporting muscles as well. So, yeah, my fears, came to light. They went to Afghanistan. and I didn't go to Afghanistan. And then because of the damage sustained, that shortened my career. So I've done 16 years and sort of told, thank you for your service. It's time for you to leave. So I know guys some guys like to leave early. Some guys like to get to their end of their career and are ready to leave. I had no aspirations of leaving at all. I saw myself as a career soldier, staying in as long as I could. So for me, it was heartbreaking that I had to leave, not through choice.
Could you not have stayed in a support role, or is that worse than?
I don't think I would have liked it. I don't think, for me, it's one of them ones that we call them desk jockeys. You can sit behind a desk and watching everyone go out, or you sort of leave. And so for me, I think you have to be even still at a certain fitness. It might be different in the US, but UK at the time it wasn't an option. And so yeah, I had to leave. I was going through what was called an identity crisis. Working in a tight-knit unit, knowing what I was doing for the next 2 years, working with like-minded individuals with the same drive, same passion, thoroughly enjoying my career to allow, where do you now fit in society? What is your role? What is your purpose? And it's not just the military or sport. It's in any walk of life. As soon as you've been with a team for a while and then you leave, it's like, there's a great book called Tribe, and they talk about we like to be part of a tribe or a group, and you've left that tribe, you can't get back in. What other tribe can you join? But also, my wife was 8 months pregnant at the time as well, so my worry was, how am I going to support my family? Is there any work out there? But thankfully for me, I got out in May 2011, which was the height of the Arab Spring. And so there was a lot of activity going on in Middle East and North Africa. And yeah, within 48 hours, I got a phone call asking if I could help set up one of the projects with the British Embassy in Benghazi. And so that sort of, for me, was my new channel, my new avenue. I had to almost forget about my time, and not forget about my time in the military, but sort of focus on this new job opportunity that was coming in front of me. But I didn't. A lot of my friends who had got out because of the piracy, they were killing it. They were making a fortune on the east coast of Africa. I didn't want to compete with them. I wanted to find my own sort of niche within the security industry. So after arriving in Libya, I soon identified that the Libyans didn't want Libya being in another Afghan and Iraq. Once Gaddafi, because Gaddafi at this point was still in Tripoli, he hadn't fallen at this point. And so all the oil and gas, all the NGOs, all the big security companies were all forming up in Benghazi. And yeah, they didn't want security companies walking around with weapons. But then chatting to some of these big security companies, some of the non-profits in oil and gas, they're talking about crisis management and evacuation plans. But actually, when I scraped the surface, there was zero in place, but they were getting a lot of money as for retainers. So I flew back. My wife gave birth to our daughter, and there was a huge proliferation of weapons at the time in Libya. And I said, look, I think I've got a niche. Can I take some money out of the bank and go back into Libya? And so I went back in and I bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt, and just designed my own evacuation plans. Put comms kit there, put money there, pelly cases that were subsurface, and spent a month just designing my own evacuation plan. You have the sea, you have the land option, and there's places to do air. We lived in Aberdeen, which is the Houston of Europe. It's the oil and gas capital of Europe. So there's a lot of oil and gas companies there, and that's what I did. I sold that concept to them if they needed it. Hopefully, never needing to use it. But for me, one of the luxuries I have is I've got a great supporting wife who runs everything behind the scenes, very entrepreneurial, set up my first security company on her phone watching TV. She took all those things that the military is like your mother, your father, they clothe you, they feed you, they pay you, you don't care what tax you're paying or who provides the heating. And so that was where a lot of guys and girls struggle when they get out, is that sort of that step up to take those responsibilities. So my wife took them away from me so I could just focus on the work side. And so I, very lucky to have her, that she wasn't worried that I had to have a stable job, doing a rotation. So I worked ad hoc. Every time I got a phone call, it was a different job, different continent, different type of job as well. And soon learned a lot about the private security sector. One phone call, could you train the Kurdish special forces? Yeah, brilliant. And the next one, you're taking some Saudi ministers to meet the president of Ghana or something. Each one I was learning about the industry. And, I just finished the London Olympics, and I was in Benghazi the evening the American ambassador got killed. And I got a phone call asking if I could help an oil company get back to Tripoli. So I took him back through safe houses I had in the desert. I could have taken the coastal road, but for me, it was like, that's too obvious. And so put them in safe houses, swap the drivers from Benghazi to the drivers from Tripoli, because it's very tribal. There's about 167 tribes. So just them drivers alone, if I took them to Tripoli, would bring attention to it. So it was really sort of understanding the politics and the tribal influences of the country, having a soak period in the safe houses just to see what was really going to sort of evolve from what was going on in Benghazi, and then got them back safely. And then 2 years later, I was in Brazil covering the World Cup, enjoying the soccer out there. And I get a phone call from the Canadian embassy saying that they were now stuck in Tripoli. It was the Tripoli War, a civil war between the militias and the government. All the other embassies had shut shop and gone home, but they were still in country. And so, I came back in and helped their planning, and single-handedly got them from Tripoli back to Tunis, which sounds very sexy in Hollywood, but it wasn't really. It was just understanding the demographics, the politics, the tribal influences. The British embassy the week before got shot at every checkpoint on the coast. So the coastal road from Tripoli to Tunis is only about 100 miles. But the military security team of the Canadian embassy, when they were there, hadn't left the Tripoli walls. They'd literally gone from their accommodation to their place of work. And because the Tripoli International Airport had burnt down, that was their exfil route. So they didn't, although it's not that far, they hadn't had a chance to wreck it and see it. So I'd taken a few people out already. And the British embassy got shot at the checkpoints, which was worrying the Canadians. So I went out with my fixer, and my fixer was a 50-year-old internet shop owner from Worcester back in UK. But he was from...
No way.
But he was from the tribes that we will be passing through. And his cousin was the president of the GNC, which was one of the governments at the time. So it's not so much about my plan and my presence, it's having that right team around you. I couldn't use him in Benghazi, but for Tripoli and West, he was perfect. And so we went out. We didn't chat to the guys at the gates with the guns. We spoke to the tribal elders, sat down with them, shared coffee, had lunch. And it's all about, as it's all about showing them respect, communication, letting them know who we were. There was no threat at all. And they safely opened the gates for us. And actually, when they went through the first town, they provided an armed escort with their vehicles, where the Brits had got shot at before. It sounds very sexy in Hollywood, but it was just understanding, or a different way of skinning the cat, looking at it in a different way. And then team wise, on paper, you probably think, right, 6 to 8 special forces guys. No, it was me, my fixer I touched on, and two fish wagons, because the fish wagons take fish from Tripoli to Tunis every day. They do that road every day. They go through those border crossings. So the border staff know who they are. They're not going to stop them. And so that's where we put the excess equipment so they couldn't get in their vehicles. So it's just literally just looking at it from a different view.
So the road with the buried kind of weapons, the caches that you had set up, that was basically so you could exfil someone else out, not so that necessarily you could, but if you needed to fall back, you had the route.
Yeah, my mindset, obviously 3 years before, was, well, when Gaddafi falls and when security companies don't have weapons, should there be a situation, we could drive over from either Egypt or from Tunis, come across into the country unarmed, and then at least if we needed them, depending on the situation, if the situation is quite bad, then yes, of course, we'd grab those cases to provide security for ourselves. But it was more really just knowing, having the comfort knowing they're there if we needed it. And that's all it was. It wasn't that we would definitely use them, but if we needed them, at least we know they're there. And they were strategically placed, near safe houses. So all the safe houses that I took the oil company in Zella, there's a couple of boxes there. And so, so at least then we knew we had it at hand. But that was almost like the worst case scenario that we would need to build them. The problem with special forces is Hollywood. Hollywood sees biceps and bullets and bombs and things like that. And, the offensive action, which is 25% of what we do, 50% of what we do in the special forces is that support and influence that hearts and minds. And that's what it is. That's what I was doing, was the 50%, the 50%, but knowing that if I needed that 25%, it was at hand nearby, but hopefully not needing it. Yeah.
So I'm not trying to get you arrested here. And if you can't answer this, that's okay. But when you said that you purchased 30 weapons on the black market, how does one go about doing, how did you have the instinct to do that?
I just, we do caches, and it's one of the things we do in the special. Caches actually originated from the IRA and the Taliban. They tend to do a lot of that. So I think for me was, I met a guy, and he was basically telling me how easy it was to get weapons. And I just thought, we should probably do this and do it quick. Actually, I went back out 6 months later because getting weapons was fine, but because it was the Arab Spring, it was ammunition. I didn't have enough ammunition. So I went back out 6 months later to the caches, dug them up, and it was perfect for me to see if they were obviously still waterproof and airtight, and then just replenish that with the ammunition. But when I did the very first job within 48 hours, helping set up the DFID project, we were given MP7s from the UK police. And actually, I was the team leader, and I made a decision that actually we didn't need the weapons. And we had all these guys coming in from Afghan and Iraq who were used to carrying weapons. And I said, no, we don't need it. So I would just make a threat assessment on the ground. They were pleased to see us, if we start carrying weapons. And, so for me, it's just, I always, that has to be your last option. But it's good that you still have that as an option. And that's where I was thinking is like, if there was a situation, how do we get in? Do we need weapons? Probably not. But if we do have them, then we know where they are.
And when you mentioned your niche, was that Libya, or was it some part of the security domain and not geographically specific?
I don't think it's Libya. I think it's that crisis management, as we've seen more recently with Afghanistan. I think it's been ahead of the curve. It's being proactive rather than reactive. And, I'll touch on the Afghan situation. We got 90% of our clients out before even August 15th, because we had a plan in place. We had the connectivity on the ground, and we saw the triggers. We saw the telltale signs that, we need to get out. Now, there's the 10% that stayed were critical. And so we ended up getting hundreds more out who weren't actually our clients, but they were stuck. And with Afghanistan, this happens maybe not on a grander scale like that, but I've seen many cases or situations like this before around the world where expats have been stuck, or there's been situations and there's nothing in place. And, the insurance companies call force majeure, which means the security companies can't do anything about it. And so for me, my niche is I've already got the plan in place. There's already systems in place that should we need to turn it on, that we can. And where am I going at and what I tend to find is that what I have seen throughout the world is, like, for example, insurance company can get an aircraft to Kabul. They can get an aircraft there. Where the gaps are is, I call it the first mile. They don't insure you from getting you from your A to your B. And so that's where I sort of come in with my teams, and we design that whole thing, and we stress test it as well. So it's not even just the combat areas, it's places, out in Africa or the Middle East or in Asia, which are hard to reach areas that these corporations have expats working for. It's like, their number one priority should be the welfare of their staff. Have you thought about how, if there's a situation, how you're going to be getting them out? I did one recently in Colombia, And a lot of them is a box ticking exercise, and it's like, yeah, we've got a route, and I was like, okay, so let's go out there and have a look at that route tomorrow. And it was raining, and so the road was impassable. So like, so what's your contingency plan? Well, there isn't one. And it's like, okay, well, there's the fault. So that's where my sort of niche is. We'll come in, we'll stress test it, we'll help design it, but being proactive with it. I know security is a dirty word. People don't like security, and I always say, well, look, it costs 10% now, because if you call me when the problem arises, then it's a lot more expensive. So that's sort of where I see my niche is that. My wife sort of says that my niche or my USP is that I can sort of go anywhere in the world and make friends. So especially in the early days, I worked on my own, Somalia, Yemen, and places. I just got myself. I think again, that's probably where I had disconnected from society. I hadn't really. The Canadian embassy being an example, that was 5 years after getting out. I was trying to match that adrenaline rush that I had when I was still in the special forces, without actually coming to terms with the fact that he'd actually left. So if something had gone wrong, I didn't have that support network. I didn't have ugly call signs coming in. I didn't have the guys hey-hoing in to come get me. So yeah, I'm always conscious of that, and that was a real eye opener. And that's when I decided to do that bike ride.
Are there any requests or phone calls you've gotten that you've had to turn down? Because you mentioned you got a wife, you got a family, that you've just said, look, this is just too much for what we're trying to do.
No, I never like to say no. The Afghan situation was really difficult for me. It was very different from the likes of Libya and other places. It wasn't like going in and grabbing the people. It was a paper pushing exercise. It was making the right calls and things like that. But what we saw with that was, I had about 47 different WhatsApp groups, ranging from the British boxing team, British Boxing Association want to get the Afghan boxing team out, to all these other groups who probably weren't actually at risk, but just saw it as an opportunity or a platform to get out. And so for me, it was like, we did have to say no to others, because it was like, well, you are generally not at risk, but these people take priority. But it was, not long after that, we have Ukraine, but that's a totally different beast itself. What you saw in Afghan was all the men were leaving the women and the kids behind. But what you saw in Ukraine was the men staying behind and the women leaving. So it was interesting to see. It was good to see in Afghan humanity, people wanting to help. But there was a few situations where people really underestimate the intricacies of an evacuation and things like that. And we're seeing now that people were being smuggled out without passports or paperwork. That's human trafficking. So you've also got to be careful. And that's the only time really I would say no, if there's any sort of legal implications as well, or anything else that could sort of backfire on me. But I like a challenge. I like to problem solve. I tend to do it when other security companies, say that they can't, and I see that as a challenge. But yeah, it has to be, legally right.
So you mentioned you then do the bike ride, as we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
So that kind of comes out of this experience.
Yeah, that's literally when I came back from the Canadian embassy. My wife sat down that evening, and my normal sort of standard operational procedure would be because I was doing all the ad hoc, would be launder my clothes, charge my phone, get ready for the next phone call. But one of my shirts was covered in blood because I was administering first aid at a road traffic collision on the border. And so I said to my wife, can we get the blood out of the shirt? She said, yeah, we can, but I'm more concerned why there was blood in there. And sort of told her the story and what I'd just done. And she said, have you heard yourself? It's almost like a throwaway comment that you've just evacuated 22 people. And you're ready to go out the door again. And it was then that Alana said I'd only been home 21 days in the 365-day calendar. So chapter 16 in my book is called Dead or Divorced. And that's the conversation that me and Alana were having at the time. And so something had to change. And I took a sabbatical from the security industry, and then, decided I was going to do property developing with Alana, which lasted about a month. And I needed another challenge, something to test myself physically and mentally, but not smuggling people out of countries or across borders.
But that comes back again, right? I mean, you still have these two worlds. It's just you needed some perspective and a break.
Yeah, I needed a break from it. We did it, and the world record was 117 days, and it wasn't. The great thing about that was, again, we talk about the plan, and having a plan and things like that. From the moment you set off to the moment you finish, something's always happening. It's almost like an operation, but on a grander scale over a longer period of time. I managed, I crashed my bike in Chile, got food poisoning, got knocked off my bike in Colombia, and there's loads of issues there. But I managed to take 10 days off the South America world record. Then we get into North America, and I'm 14 days ahead. I'm like, perfect. We can take a couple of days off if need be. And I'd spoken to the previous record holders, and all their issues were in South and Central America. They all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina. So me, being a military man, was like, well, why not address those issues early? Why don't you tackle them first, get them out of the way, and then come into North America hoping that all your issues were behind. And so that's what I did. 14 days ahead. And then Alana rang me about 5 times, and Alana was a campaign director, so she's very good at keeping all those distractions away from him. And so my initial thought was there's something wrong with the children. So I rang her back, and then she told me we'd been invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding, which was nice. But she said, yeah, you don't understand it. You need to be finished by day 102. So going into the phone call, I was 14 days ahead of the world record. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind. And so, again, it's a bit like those scenarios you can't factor. When I was putting pen to paper, there was a lot of things that I could overcome, but whether it's natural disasters, coups, or third-party influence, I couldn't factor that. So that's why, although it was 117 days, I was aiming for 110. So I had that 1 week fudge that I could use. But yeah, I didn't have fudge for 14 days or 15 days. And so changed the way that I cycled majority of the time through the night in North America, using the winds to my advantage, and did North America in 11 and a half days from Del Rio up to the Canadian border. And I was a week outside and thought, perfect. And then this gentleman who's got 3 other endurance world records sponsored by Red Bull and all the brands, he'd come out on social media that day and said that he was going to do it under 100 days. So every time I kept hitting my objective kept moving. And so, I ended up cycling for 22 hours in the last 30 hours in minus 18 to make sure that I came in under the 100 days. And so, yeah, important to have a plan, but the actual success of that bike ride was almost that sort of SF mentality, that expeditionary, like we sometimes go on the ground on ops and we don't know what to expect when we're there. We don't know what the infrastructure's like. You have a mission or you have an objective, you just need to make that happen. And that was a bit like this. I was, very reactive to situation changes as they were coming, even to the very last day. I was changing the plan, but made sure the objective hadn't changed though.
Did you make it to the wedding?
We did. Yeah. So we finished it. We raised, more impressively, we raised £930,000, which at the time was about $1.3 million. It's probably $930,000 at the current exchange rate. But I finished we flew back on the 17th, and the wedding was 2 days later. It was I think on reflection, I was still just trying to get used to being with the family. I'd spent 3.5 months on the road. I'd lost 12 kilos in weight, about 25 pounds, 27 pounds. And I wasn't aware how big an event it was. I knew, of course, it was royal wedding, it was going to be big, but it wasn't until I landed the enormity of it. And so I just wish that I'd had time to appreciate what I'd done before I then went into another huge high, because, it was all the questions, especially post wedding, were, what canapes did you have, or what did you drink? And I'm like, really? I've just cycled 14,000 miles, became the first man in history to do it under 100 days. But yeah, it's sort of, the wedding really overshadowed the accomplishment. But that's the pros and cons of having a friend who's quite popular.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, everybody saw that wedding on TV. That's cool. Yeah. You got to be there for it. When does the book come up in your life, Dean? Like, why write that? I mean, I'm interested in it for sure, but what was the spark for you?
I think for me, when I finished the bike ride, I did it so I wasn't taking those risks. So, I wasn't, in the deserts and, getting people out of war-torn countries. I didn't see a TV career. I didn't see books or guest speaking. I did, I didn't plan for that. I didn't plan for any of that. And of course, the only two questions I got, how was the wedding? And then the other one was, what next? I was like, really? And it's like, yeah. So people always want to know what's next. And so, yeah, we were quite slow in that. And then it was like, well, let's get the website. And then people started to hear about the story. And then, yeah, I got approached by a literary agent, and they said, look, they'd heard my story, and I sort of told them, and they said, we'd love to put that into a book for you. So, yeah, that's what we did. And so, yeah, the book, Relentless, as it is, and that image actually pretty much, although disturbing as it is, summarizes my time in the military. That was me. That wasn't long before the parachuting accident, actually. That was it. So, but the book's great. It's almost like 3 books in one. You've got the childhood in the military, you've got the private security stuff, and I only scraped the surface on some of the stuff we've done on this interview. There's some other great stuff there in the private security sector. Why I evacuated the Canadian embassy only for $7,000. That's all I charged. And it's like, what? And then in the book, it'll tell you the reasons why. And then that sort of then leads into the bike ride. So yeah, there's almost like 3 separate stories in there. But I think from the bike ride, as the story unfolds, you can see where I talked about experiences, can't be experienced without experiences, where I've picked up and learned a lot. If I'd done that bike ride, having not been in the military, in the private security sector, it would have been totally different. I would have approached it in a different way. I would have probably reacted in a different way to some of the scenarios and situations. But thankfully for me, I just took, I wasn't a cyclist, but I just took those sort of past experiences and tried to put it into another sport.
Yeah. So for those who were listening and couldn't see the cover that Dean was holding up, it's basically Dean in probably, I would say, your prime in the military. What are you holding there? What's the weapon?
It's an FN Mini-Me, but we ran out of the ammo bags. So literally the ammunition is just wrapped around the weapon. I've got the link just hanging off my neck, baseball cap back to front, but just laughing, just sharing a joke with someone, and sort of really summarizes your time in the military. One of the ethoses of the special forces is actually humor. You need to have a sense of humor, as you need, however dark it is, you need a sense of humor, because there's gonna be some dark times. So
it's just the biggest smile on your face, like you could see from.
Yeah.
And I think
I'd love to remember what was said. I'd love to remember what was said.
Yeah. And so the book comes out, the US version of this comes out November 28th, so people can get that.
Yeah, they can get it on Amazon or any other good bookshop, Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
How hard was it to write? I've heard that it's very difficult to write a book, like as you stack it against all these things we just talked about.
Yeah, I think, I was very fortunate. I managed to get a ghostwriter who was ex-military, so he understood the terminology. So he really helped me with this book, because if it was left to me, it'd still be on chapter 1. My wife Alana, she's banging out about a book every month at the moment. She has about 5 books coming out, but she writes them herself. Whereas for me, I wouldn't have that patience to do it myself. But it was really good having Jez help me write it, because for me, when I was writing the book, I always approach things and do things and wonder what my friends from the special forces community, how they read it, or how they're going to sort of interpret it. So I said, we need to go into more detail on this. And he's like, 95% of your readers won't even know what that is. And so really the book, one of the feedbacks in the book is how it flows really well. And awesome. And that's compliment to the ghostwriter, because he sort of, probably everything I sort of said, he skimmed over. He said, we don't need that. Don't need that. So yeah, it's a different way of writing.
Perfect. So I'll get you out of here in just a second, Dean. There's 2 questions I'd like to ask everybody.
Please.
One is, when you were in combat, or the private security side, this could go either way. Was there anything that you wanted to have on you, that like a trinket or good luck charm or something that somebody gave you that had a lot of meaning that you wanted to have with you or nearby?
Oh, interesting. That's a good story. No, because when we're in combat, we don't take anything with us, because it could be used against you. So no photographs, no insignia, and things like that. So I've sort of, because of that, there wasn't anything that really stood out for me. There's been plenty of times that I wish I had, some jerky or something. There's plenty of times I needed food, food or water, and that's typical me. I just, as long as you feed and water me, I'll keep going. But there's nothing that sort of stands out for that. Maybe some more ammunition sometimes, but no.
Well, you had the iPad, you had the iPod Mini, right? You had the music.
Yeah, we had the iPod Nano, but that gets left in the helo. So when the CH-47 lands, that stays on there, you see. And then when they come back in, you're back in your seats.
Got it.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
And I think you've mentioned the answer to what I'm about to ask you, but I do like to ask everybody, especially looking back at what you've done, private security, but your time in the military, the injury. I mean, that sounds like you described it very calmly, but I can't even imagine what that flight down felt like.
Yeah.
And probably some of the sacrifices you've had along the way, just missing time with the family. As you look back at all of that, would you go back and do it again?
I'd do it all again. I'd do it all again. I think, as you rightly said, I've touched on it before, is I wouldn't be here sharing my story if I'd done it a different way. You have to learn from your mistakes. And always, one thing I like to get across is people are scared of failure. The word failure, people don't like. And I don't see it as failure. I always see it as an experience. So there was things that I'd done right in my life and some things that I'd done wrong. But as long as I learned from that mistake and didn't repeat it, then you sort of move forward. I think, and you touched on there, the family, we found it after the Canadian embassy. It's trying to find that balance of the yin and the yang. And, at the moment, I have a 1-month-old, and the way I am with her is very different than I was with Molly. Molly, she was 6 hours old, and then I was on a flight to Guinea. By the Thursday, I was being interrogated by the Guinean Special Forces, and so a bit of a different approach, but a different period in my life. At that point, I just needed to bring money in. But I'm learning, like I said, I'm learning from the mistakes that I made before. But yeah, I just wish I had a bit more time with the family. But we're doing that now. The yin and yang has gone the other way. I hardly work now. No, I joke. I did work. Yeah.
That's perfect. And I guess I should have also said, you've got the book coming out, you've got the private security, you got the speaking engagements, people can find you at the website, but you also touched on some of the philanthropy. You raised money with the bike ride. Is there anything else that you point people to while you have their attention?
Yeah, so we raised $1.3 million to mental health. Now, I did the mental health campaign because my good friend Harry asked if I would do it. For me, I still very much working in the philanthropy angle. We're now in the US, so starting to work now with some of the US veteran charities. I'd say probably keep an eye out in the next year or so for my next challenge. My next challenge is, my USP is I take a sport or a discipline I've never done before. So cycling, I've enjoyed it. So next one is to kayak the world's longest river. It's never been done before, from source to sea, which is the River Nile, from Rwanda to Egypt. And that sort of charity message is going to be around climate change and modern slavery and human trafficking. So yeah, that's the next one I'm sort of focusing on. The period between now and then is, it doesn't matter how many world records you got or how many millions you raise for society. When I've been approaching some sponsors and sort of TV networks, it's like, well, how many Instagram followers you got? Is that really? And so we're in a society where it's all about eyes on you. So my plan this next 18 months is that I've got some great TV opportunities, which I can't really talk about, but yeah, mainstream, some out next year, and that will really raise my profile. And then what that does, it makes it easier for me then to chat to sponsors, share the next challenge. But from a philanthropy angle, when it's fundraising, if you've got more eyes on you, then there's more people that can donate. So yeah, the long term, that will be the plan.
Perfect. God, that's awesome. All right. Well, Dean, thanks so much for taking the time with us. People can dig in more to some of the crazy exploits you've had in your past in the book coming out November 28th. And just thanks for sitting down with us. This has been a lot of fun.
No, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story with another gentleman from the other side of the pond, although he is living here in the U.S. So it's always good to get a little variation in there, especially our first time with someone from the SBS. So let's dive into some listener comments. Thought it would be fitting to get some from the Billy Billingham interview, obviously another Brit, this one on the SAS side of the house. And this is a YouTube comment, and it comes from DWR Abalke. And it says, "This is one of the greatest interviews of Billy Billingham I've seen. Good questions, and the host lets Mr. Billingham talk. He is such an amazing storyteller." I thought, wow, an hour 45, that is long. And here I am thinking, what, already over? But I want to hear more. Awesome. I really like the Nike Squadron portion at the minute 10 mark, and also the Hotel California story was really intense at minute 37. Then another comment that just came in from Daz of the Moo, also on Billy, from YouTube, and he says, "Hey Ryan, I've been looking for interviews with Billy recently, and this is undoubtedly the best one I've found. Glad I found your site. Another subscriber to your, I'm sure, growing fan base." So just thank you to both of you. That Billy Billingham interview was a big one. I loved talking to him. He's just such a down-to-earth guy, so it was easy to chat with. But it really resonated with people. I mean, it really took off, and I'm glad folks have had a chance to hear his story, especially a lot of Americans. We've heard about the SAS. I've gotten to meet some of these guys in person and seen what they can do. It's really impressive. They deserve a lot of this credit and the chance to share these pretty cool stories. I mean, they're working hand in hand with some of the best, and they are some of the best. So glad it came through. Thank you for these great comments. And then the last comment here is from Manu Kadingo, and it's a YouTube comment on the Gus Biggio interview. And he says, "Ryan, you do a very high quality interview. The men you speak with are our best, and you have a very good insight and touch as things unfold. I'm certain the CIA wishes you were still with them. Thank you, John C." Huge compliment there. I do appreciate that. And I'm sure the CIA is not missing me, although I do miss that place every now and then. But I thought this was an interesting comment as well, because it was on the Gus Biggio interview. I think that one, I wasn't surprised we didn't get as much attention on that one, just because it wasn't a special operator, but it is worth a listen. Gus is a great storyteller, and it's the civil affairs side, but this is kind of shaping the battlefield, and it's people rolling around in all the war zones we hear about, very little security and having to make do. And they went through some serious fighting. And the book is great, The Wolves of Helmand. If you may have passed that one by just thinking, this guy's not a door kicker, I don't want to hear that, it's worth a listen, especially because Gus was in the service, a Marine infantry officer, pre-9/11, got out, had a great, very cushy job, and voluntarily gave that up to go back in and be a Marine again. And they asked him to do civil affairs, which was absolutely the right answer, and the Marines shaped that battlefield because of a lot of his work. So it's a good one. It's something that you don't hear about as much, and you should. I always had a place in my heart for these guys on the ground who are rolling around like that, and whenever we could get overhead and just scare someone off in our Apaches, we would do it because they needed it. They didn't have all the firepower everyone else had, but they were doing God's work over there. Thanks for these comments, everyone. Keep them coming. Thank you for your support. It keeps me doing this. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this one today. We got some great ones coming up. Stay safe.